What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, July 5th, 2011 here. We're getting into the week after the long holiday weekend. I have to tell you, July 4th, at least out here in Hawaii, I don't know about where you were, but out here, almost a complete washout. Not that there's a lot of enthusiasm to celebrate any holidays related to the nation that basically conquered this place and stole it from the Hawaiian people. But last night, it felt more like a funeral than a celebration. The state of Hawaii changed the laws regarding fireworks, and all they had for sale in the stores were basically party poppers. And the fireworks companies tried to dress them up to look like they were still fountains and stuff, but they weren't. You pick it up, you pull a string, it goes bang and throws confetti, and that was it. And I felt insulted looking at those things. You know, the state government saying, this is all we trust you with. And I guess my sentiment was shared by a lot of other people because I didn't hear any of them last night, except for the big professional shows on the military bases where they're allowed to have things that go boom. It was really a very quiet night. And it was kind of a washout here. It seems like the 4th of July has had the real meaning of it just stripped away. 20% of American kids don't even understand why we have an Independence Day or who it was we broke independent of. And most of the rest think, it was us against the British. No, it was we the people against the government. And so July 4th, it's being emptied out of meaning, and it's just another come on for the shopping malls. Yes, it's independent. Declare your independence from high prices. Come on down to our red, white, and blue sale, and all the other stuff like that. It's a lot like Christmas that has also been, eviscerated of any real sentimentality. And now that 4th of July is over, we can look forward to seeing the Christmas holiday stuff start to show up in the stores here in a matter of another few weeks, to judge by previous years here. So it was a little disappointing, and one of the reasons I moved out here to Hawaii is you could have fireworks. And now that's been taken away from us as well. Some Independence Day. We fought a war against the government over 2% taxation. Now we got to get naked at the airport to travel, and they won't let us set off fireworks to celebrate our freedoms. You're free, except you're not free to do that. Alrighty, phone lines are open. Brett's in the control room answering the phone calls. Number is 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Contrary to what the corporate media is trying to tell you, the Casey verdict is not the big news story from this last weekend. This last weekend, the big stories are all about the International Aid Flotilla attempting to get food and medicine and building supplies and school supplies down to the people of Gaza. And Israel's vanity, its ego exercise, its petty vindictiveness to prove that, yes, we're still in control of that part of the world and you can't do what we want. So it kind of got hysterical. The United States aid ship, the Audacity of Hope, which was sort of considered the flagship of the whole effort, attempted to set sail on Saturday, got about 20 minutes out of harbor. We're, I think, less than 5 miles from international waters, when I guess somebody made a phone call and the Greek Coast Guard came out and basically intercepted the ship, took it back into port. They arrested the captain. He has now been released. More about that a little bit later here. And the boat was simply there in the dock. They put barbed wire around it, basically making everybody on board a prisoner. For no real reason that anybody can come up with other than Israel said, you will stop the boat there. And, of course, this has turned into a huge political public relations disaster because Greece doesn't really have a legal right to prevent people from leaving their territory. And they don't really have the boat is, perfectly safe. They came across the Atlantic on it. And all of this is just trumped up. And the Greek officials are saying, yeah, we only did this because America and Israel ordered us to. They called in the loans. Apparently this is tied in with this whole austerity and bailout deal. Apparently the government of Greece was told, if you do not block the flotilla, we will refuse to grant you any more loans and crash your economy for you. Isn't it amazing? With so much on the line with the Greek economy, including the possible destruction of the euro and the eurozone, it still has to be twisted and spun to serve Israel's little petty vindictiveness against the people of Gaza. So then, as this starts to turn into a full-blown international embarrassment for poor little Israel, poor little nuclear-armed Israel's terrified of letters to the children of Gaza, Israel offers a deal to Greece. We will take the aid for the ships to Gaza through our official channels. Isn't that a wonderful thing to do? And the United Nations said, oh yes, that will solve the problem. How very special. Greece and the United Nations and Israel have made a deal to take the aid supplies to Ashdod, Israel, instead of Gaza. Now, setting aside the fact that the last batch of supplies delivered to Ashdod was not delivered to Gaza until it had rotted to uselessness. They left it on the dock. They took a lot of press photos on it. They just let it sit there until basically the food rotted and the medicines became unusable. And then they put it on a truck and sent it into Gaza and said, see, we're sending the aid through. Aren't we wonderful people? Okay, so setting aside that little dirty trick that they did the last time, none of these supplies on the aid ships belong to either Israel or Greece or the United Nations. It's none of their business what gets done with it. They have no legal right or authority to make any such deals. This was a pretense of an agreement designed to obscure the fact that they're just stealing the stuff. This is like saying Blackbeard has agreed to loot ships that do not belong to him, and it's going to be okay because he will transfer the valuables there to Tortuga instead of their intended destination at Panama. That's basically what the deal is here. Greece is engaging in theft, piracy, and privateering on behalf of Israel. Israel has granted Greece letters of marque against international ships, including a ship of the United States of America. And the United Nations has no business agreeing to the theft and transference of property that belong to other people. And speaking as one who made a donation to support this aid flotilla, I do not cede to Israel, Greece, the United Nations, or even the United States permission to interfere with my property or its intended destination. Now, the interference with the letters being carried by the Audacity of Hope to the children of Gaza, that's interference with the mails. That's a felony here in the United States of America. I think it's pretty much the equivalent crime anywhere on planet Earth. Interfering with the mail is a serious, serious crime. And they basically seized it and hijacked it. And it's an act of piracy or privateering. It doesn't matter whose flag is flying from the masthead of the pirate ship. It's still theft and diversion, and they're trying to stand around and say, oh, yes, we agree that we're going to take this from you and give it to this other people over there so that they can still pretend that they're in control of the situation. And no, they're not. And these countries don't have a right to agree what to do with other people's property. It's still theft. Now, a second ship over the weekend, the Canadian ship, tried to get out of the harbor of Greece, and the Greek Coast Guard, forcing it back to shore, at one point rammed and damaged the ship. This is now like 4 of the ships that have been damaged by either covert sabotage or direct action. And apparently the Greeks were saying, look, we're sorry, we were told to do this. So that's back on shore. Now, the good news is the French ships are in international waters on their way to Gaza. One of the ships, the Dignity, was moored in Corsica. And, of course, Israel and all these pro-Israel groups and everything were over there in Corsica saying, you can't let them go. They're evil. They smell bad. They dress funny. You must keep them in the harbor. And Corsica said, we really don't have a legal right to do that. We don't have a legal right to do that. And they allowed the ship to sail. And Corsica is right because in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13.2, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a declaration adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, and all member states of the United Nations are bound by it. This is the letter of the law. If you belong to the United Nations, you must abide by this agreement, by this declaration. These are the basic rights of people. It is the global version of the Bill of Rights. Not to be challenged, not to be set aside. The reason this document was created was to save the world from the evils that we had seen in World War II. You may not go here. You may not leave. You are a prisoner of this government. You must whatever. Now, obviously, Israel is already in violation of Article 13.2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights both in their refusal to allow Gazans to leave Gaza, which they're still doing, and in refusing Palestinians a right of return to their homes, which is not only in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was one of two conditions placed on Israel for their admission to the United Nations, and Israel has never complied with that condition. They just said, okay, we're members, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to keep our promises. We're above all that sort of things. So we're going to take a break for commercials here. When we're going to come back, we're going to talk about all these violations of law, international law, Greece has done to please their Israeli masters. You hang out with criminals, you get stuck committing crimes. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about the aid flotilla. And I want to back up here because I'm already getting the hate email coming in there saying, Hamas hates Israel, and Hamas is this, and Hamas is that. Look, if somebody's invading your lands and stealing your home, would you not fight back? Would you not man up and say, you don't have a right to come in and bulldoze my homes to make way for vacation homes for Israel? Would you not do that? Would you not defend your home, the lands you've lived on, your family's been on for hundreds of years? Would you not defend your home? Israel's whole argument about security, and by the way, McClatchy News already published official Israeli documents saying that the blockade has nothing to do with security. It's about starving Gazans into abandoning their elected government and accepting Israeli rule. That's all it's about. It's a repeat of the Soviet blockade of West Berlin all over again. So we're talking about this whole situation, this aid flotilla going in there, and Israel trying to prove how manly they are by continuing to starve the Gazan people. And now they're getting Greece to do their dirty work. Israel took a major public relations hit a year ago when they attacked the aid flotilla and they murdered all those people. And so now their solution is, we'll get other people to do our dirty work. Just like we get the Americans to go kill the Arabs for us, we'll get Greece to block the ships. And that puts Greece in trouble under international law. And I know that Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations will do nothing about it because he too is compromised by Israel. But under Article 13.2 of the United Nations, core document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, designed to prevent the kind of evils we saw in World War II from ever happening again, Greece has no legal right to refuse those ships permission to sail. They don't. They're not allowed to hold them prisoner. So now we've got a French ship which departed from Corsica because Corsica understands they don't have a legal right under international law to stop the ship from sailing. So the next step is going to be for all these flotilla ships to sail from Greece to Corsica. And Greece has no grounds whatsoever to refuse them. Israel will demand that they do, and that's going to create an even more insane picture. So this one ship is sailing from Corsica, and just before we went to airtime, we got the word that while everybody was in a hot lather over the ship sailing from Corsica, the other French ship, the Dignity, got out of its harbor in Greece and made it to international waters, where the Greeks cannot interdict and turn it back without it being an international crime of piracy. So there are two boats from France that are in international waters on their way to Gaza right now. It's only going to take one to get through to send the message to the world that Israel's iron grip on that part of the world is slipping. Remember, that's why the Soviet Union was in such a panic. Anytime just one person would get over that Berlin Wall, it was seen as a huge political disaster. Because the Soviet Union's reputation of dominance and dictatorship and the Iron Curtain was that they could absolutely forbid people from moving from one country to another. From, in this case, West Germany, or East Germany into West Germany. And it didn't work. Every new escape was an embarrassment. All it's going to take is one boat to get into Gaza. And even if it doesn't, even if Israel succeeds in locating, good luck, and interdicting these two French boats, because I'll tell you right now, they don't have any big banners on them saying, we're on our way to Gaza. They look like every other piece of commercial traffic that's out there. So good luck finding them in the first place. And even if Israel does and stops them, it just reminds everybody that Israel, nuclear-armed Israel, is acting like a petty tyrant against little tiny Gaza to starve them into submission, Just the way the United States, with its nuclear arsenal, is still imposing this stupid embargo on Cuba, little tiny Cuba. Bananas and tobacco plants and fruit and rum, and that's it. And the United States still keeps an embargo on them all these years after the Bay of Pigs because it's an affair of honor. They embarrassed us, and we cannot back down. Actually, you could. Because Cuba didn't embarrass the United States of America. The CIA embarrassed the United States of America. And too much of our foreign policy has already been being driven by these old Cold War fossils who operate from the principle of, we never admit error, we never apologize, we never back down. And, of course, that is exactly how wars get started. So these people really are acting in a very stupid and arrogant way. And it's dragging the world closer and closer to a nuclear war, which I think would be a good idea if we could avoid. So what are we going to do about this? Well, obviously, the only thing that we can do that's peaceful is to boycott the situation. And people say, oh, we can't boycott this. I will grant you that the United States of America, even in the economic mess that it's in, is not likely to really feel the effects of a boycott. Israel has been under a boycott for years, and they remain obdurate and unrepentant. They will let their own people starve to death before they ever admit that they were wrong and that maybe God's chosen people aren't really behaving in a very godly fashion. But Greece hovers at the edge of an economic collapse. They're trying to get more loans to sort of float their situation along. In the long run, it's not going to change anything. They're still going to crash and they're still going to default, but Papandreou is hoping it's going to be somebody else's administration. So Israel and the U.S. came in and said, we'll give you a few more loans if you'll just stop the flotilla. And Papandreou said, oh yeah, great deal. But if a global boycott against Greece is declared and catches on and goes viral, then people are not going to want to invest anymore in Greece. No tourism, no products being sold. Greece is stripped of its ability to make the payments on the loans it has right now, no matter how much Papandreou flogs his people. And that'll drive the whole situation even closer to a revolution. And when Greece crashes, and it will, the euro will come down. I mean, Denmark's already starting to put up border control between their country and Germany. The whole eurozone is on the edge of fracturing. We declare a boycott against Greece. We put it out there on the internet and the alternative media, and everybody says, yeah, this is a good idea. The whole kit and caboodle could come crashing down, all because Israel didn't want cookies to get to Gaza. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The mail is pouring in. Oh, those Israelis are angry with me right now. One of the arguments that they're trying to put out there is, don't you realize how much suffering you're going to bring down on the people of Greece for the actions of their government? And my reply to that is it going to be any less than the suffering the Greek government is bringing down on the Greek people with austerity? They're going to be driven into poverty one way or the other. The difference is the Greek government and its slavery to Israel will go on, and they'll never back off oppressing the Greek people, whereas a boycott that brings down the Greek government, 6 to 8 months down the road, the Greek people would be doing really good. They should follow Iceland's example. Throw the crooked bankers who created this mess in jail, fire the government that helped them do it. That's the path to the future. By the way, apparently Iceland is now establishing diplomatic relations with Palestine and ignoring Greece. So expect Israel to try and find some way to get the Americans to go kill those gosh darned Icelanders, and put them back in the clutches of a private central bank the way God intended it to be. So, moving right along here, now as I mentioned before, this threat of a boycott, because of Greece's fragile state and the euro's extreme fragile state, and we're seeing the beginnings of the fracturing of the whole European Union, which was one of the foundations for the globalist government. If it comes apart, this push for a new world order dies with it. And Greece is so weak, even the mere rumor of a global boycott against anything from Greece is going to tip them over into default. And that will be the end of the whole situation. And it's amazing when you think about it, how selfish Israel is to risk this kind of destruction across all of Europe for the sake of their own ego. So that they can go on saying, yes, we'll starve anybody we want to starve because we're God's chosen people. Whatever else they think about that. But I think the word about the boycott has already filtered through. First of all, because they tried to come up with that lame deal to say, oh, we'll take the aid over there for you, even though, of course, they never actually have. They just let it rot. And after it's all rotted and useless, then they send it through the gate with a big press release saying, see, we gave them the assistance and everything. But the captain of the Audacity of Hope has been released. They have not dropped the charges, but he's been released without bail and without any restrictions, which is Greece's way of saying, okay, maybe we shouldn't have arrested you in the first place. And we got to keep the charges pending because that's what it's going to take to keep Israel happy. But I think Greece is looking for a way out of this mess. It may be that the reason the French boat got into international waters earlier today is the Greek Coast Guard has been given a very quiet order to maybe sort of kind of look the other way so that Greece can sort of extricate itself from this horrible mess they've gotten themselves into. It's too late. Boycott Greece. You do not mess with humanitarian aid and not feel the wrath of humanitarian civilization, which excludes the government, but that's another situation whatsoever. We seem to be having an effect, and Greece seems to be backing off and looking for a way out of this mess, so keep up the pressure. Call their consulates, call their travel agencies, call their importers and say, we're not buying your products, we're not investing in your companies, we're not planning to come and tour your country because there's not much point in touring yet another country that is a slave to Israel because it all kind of looks the same after a while. Meanwhile, just to show you how scared and desperate Israel is in this mess, because they're in a no-win situation. They've backed themselves into this whole corner. They either have to let the ships get through to Gaza, major political defeat, or they're going to have to interdict these French ships in international waters, or even Gaza waters, and it's still going to be seen as nuclear-armed Israel whooping on the people of Gaza. And we already know from those McClatchy newspaper articles, this is not about a threat by Gaza towards Israel. It's about Israel starving the Gazans into abandoning their elected government and accepting proxy rule through Fatah. It's the same thing the USSR did to West Berlin. We didn't stand for it then. Why are we standing for it now? That is the question everybody has to ask themselves. Meanwhile, over on Long Island, New York, Congressman Gary Ackerman has actually come out with the position that any effort to hold Israel to international law is anti-Semitism. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. This is linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. This guy is basically taking the attitude that anybody who's trying to get Israel to follow international law really doesn't care about the law or Israel. They're just being Jew haters again. Have you ever heard anything so absurd in your life? That's like saying that we're fighting against the Nazis just because we hate the German people. It's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's not that they're in violation of international law. We just hate the German people. And that's the reason to do what we're doing. It's absurd in the extreme. And yet I guess that's the only argument they've got left. We should let Israel violate international law because they're poor Jewish people and the Germans were nasty to them. And we shouldn't hold them to the same standards as every other country. It's absurd. They're grasping at straws. They're grasping at straws. And sure enough, anytime you're talking to them about what's going on in Gaza and they can't make any valid points, the first thing they go to back is the Holocaust and the Nazis. We've been through enough. You shouldn't be doing. Look at what the Nazis did to. Well, actually, the Nazis are all dead and gone. And as a matter of fact, pretty much everybody who dealt with them is also all dead and gone. I was not alive when Hitler and the Nazis were doing their thing, and most of you listening to the show weren't. It happened before our time. It's history from the first half of the previous century. We're all living in the 21st century except for Israel, that's trying as hard as they can to take us all back to the 1950s when Israel could do anything they want simply by waving Holocaust and Nazis at us. And back then it worked, and it doesn't work anymore because it's outside most of our experiences. And we're sick of hearing about it. A lot of bad things happened in World War II. And there were a lot of villains on all sides. This monomaniacal obsession with this one group of villains and this one group of victims is tiring. And it's boring, and we've had enough of it. We can't do a thing to change what happened in history before we were born. What we can do, what we should do, what we ought to be doing is correct the atrocities and genocides and ethnic cleansings we're seeing right before our very eyes today. And yes, we should hold Israel to international law, regardless of who they are or what has happened to them in some mythical ancient time. It's not relevant. It's not Israel's history that's at question, it's Israel's actions. It's not who they are, it is what they do. I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm anti-jerk. I'm anti-liar. I'm anti-thief. I'm anti-genocidalist. And I'm proud of those. Meanwhile, just to put the U.S. government to shame, the government of Malaysia has sent a formal protest to the Greek embassy over their treatment of the Audacity of Hope and the other flotilla ships. We have the government of Malaysia working to protect the rights of American citizens at the same time the government of the United States of America is telling Israel, yeah, go ahead, throw them in jail, we don't care. Did you ever think you would live to a time when a foreign government, Malaysia, is more concerned about your welfare than the government of the United States of America? When I was a kid, if you told me I was going to live to see that, I would have laughed at you. And yet, here it is. The U.S. government does nothing to protect Americans in the 8th Flotilla. Malaysia steps in. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm going to move on from this flotilla thing. We're obviously our hopes and our encouragements and our pride and our admiration sail with those French ships. And there are still other ships in the flotilla. And now that they know Corsica will allow a departure to Gaza, I expect all of the flotilla ships will be raising anchor in Greece and saying, we're going to Corsica. And you have no grounds under international law to prevent that from happening. Of course, the Israelis are going to go on drilling holes in the bottom and sawing off propellers and all the other stuff they've been doing all along here. Just proving how childish and petty they are about this whole thing. We're going to have our blockade. You know, I want to see them down on the ground kicking and screaming, just throwing a complete tantrum, showing the world exactly, what Israel's government is really all about, Alrighty, so getting on to the 4th of July holiday, and this is really going to annoy all the carbon Nazis, the California ski resorts were open yesterday. The very hard winter, the lingering heavy snowpack, and the very cool spring months meant that for most of those California ski resorts, there was enough snow still on the ground for people to go up and go skiing on the 4th of July. So I'm beginning to suspect that maybe Al Gore was being a little less than honest with us about his so-called documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. But we should never question his documentary. After all, he was given a Nobel Peace Prize and an Academy Award for that. Now, the latest actual hard evidence, not all the manipulation and simulations and computer models that they like to wave at us, but it appears now that world temperature has not increased at all from 1998 through 2008, even though man-made carbon emissions rose by nearly a third. Remember when Al Gore was out there saying carbon dioxide drives temperature? And he actually had the data backward because the ice core data shows that as temperature goes up, it tends to produce more carbon dioxide because the Earth has more life on it. Gee, you think? But Al Gore's purpose is not to educate the public. It's to trick you into carbon taxes so that his little carbon credit brokerage that Ken Lay helped him set up can make him very, very rich. That's all. It's about the money. That's all it's about here. Now, the corporate media, because of the very harsh winters we've had, they're having to grudgingly back off and say, well, yeah, you caught us. The Earth isn't getting warmer. And over in Great Britain, an analysis of the actual temperature record, not something that's gone through all the statistical manipulations, but an examination of the actual raw temperature data has shown, yeah, 3 harsh winters in a row. Gee, you think? And they're saying it looks like there's going to be more because we're seeing this decrease in solar activity, which the carbon Nazis kept saying, oh, no, the sun has nothing to do with temperature here on Earth. Really? So if we turn the sun out, if we turn it off, we're going to be just as warm and toasty as we have been for these last couple of billion years? Some of the things these carbon Nazis come up with are just absurd in their silliness. Remember, we've got the former head of Greenpeace admitting they just made up all that stuff about Greenland losing its ice in the next 20 years. You got Paul Watson, Mr. I'm going to risk the lives of my crew to save a couple of whales, out there saying it doesn't matter what reality is. All that matters is what you can get people to believe. There's an admission right there for you. So basically, the carbon Nazis have failed. 10 years ago, Al Gore and his minions, his cultists, launched this propaganda campaign. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars, public relations and media, to lie you into thinking the world was getting warmer and you were to blame, with redemption possible only through sacrifice of freedoms and money, mostly the money. Now, in the year 2000, the UK Met Office, the Government Meteorological Office, which is part of the Warmista cabal, they were caught in the whole ClimateGate email scandal, but they came out and proclaimed that snow was going to be a thing of the past. They did this 11 years ago. And it's still online. It's still there, and of course everybody's archived it. We've all saved our local copy. And here we are with record snow, and unfortunately, sadly, record flooding. And everybody in all the local governments was caught off guard because they kept hearing, mild winter, not to worry about. So the tire stores didn't have enough snow tires. Local communities did not have enough de-icing chemicals. They didn't buy or repair enough of the snow plows to deal with all of this stuff. And everybody got caught off guard, including not preparing the flood control to handle these major floods. And Al Gore is out there still trying to figure out some way he can sell you this whole global warming thing, and it absolutely doesn't even bother him all the damage and destruction and ruined homes and dead people that are piling up by all these missed calls about what should we prepare for this winter and this spring. Because all the communities are cash-strapped in this economic crisis, and if the government and the media are telling them, hey, you don't need to worry about a lot of snow, they cut the budget there. Then they get caught off guard. People were freezing to death in their homes. Now, we could be generous and magnanimous and simply state that the climate alarmists were just flat out wrong. And on that reason alone, we should stop listening to them. We really should. But the ClimateGate emails confirmed the deceptions were intentional. A lot of money and a lot of political capital and a lot of academic reputations were invested in this whole concept of global warming and this push for a carbon tax. And there was so much investment in there that a little thing like reality could not be allowed to get in the way. So in service to their agenda and their greed, the carbon Nazis lied to you all. They falsified the data. They're still doing it with the sea level data. And they searched for ways, as they wrote it down themselves, hide the decline. Now, of course, the media is saying there has been a decline. They're saying, yeah, there was a decline. And we have the emails where the Warmista cabal, if you were saying, we've got to hide the decline. Our jobs are on the line here. We've based our entire reputations. It's kind of like when Galileo came along and with his telescope proved that, yeah, the sun was the center of the solar system and Earth moved around it, and all those academics who had made their fortunes and their careers studying epicycles because the Earth was supposed to be the center of the universe. This is how they reacted. When the church was there torturing Galileo to change his views, those academics with the epicycle degrees were saying, yeah, burn him. Make him say the universe is the way we said it is, because after all, we're academics. We have degrees. Of course the world is the way that we say it is. So the media is having to back up because everybody's saying, look, why are you talking about warming with record snow, record cold, record floods? You guys, they're not even connected with reality anymore. And the media is trying to protect their credibility, and they're trying to report what's going on without having to admit that they were part of the propaganda machine that sold this lemon to the world 10 years ago. But they are. And I want you all to remember this, because we have exposed before us a for real, genuine, conspiracy involving governments, universities, scientific agencies, and the media to tell you something was going on in the world that was not, in order to extract your obedience and your money. And I want you to remember this, not because of ego and not because of a push for donations, but because in the coming weeks, the same propaganda machine that insisted you were all destroying the earth unless you agreed to pay carbon taxes and surrender your freedoms to a global environmental authority, they're going to be coming back equally insistent about a lot of other things, like the need to invade, well, pick a nation. They're going to come back and say, oh, yeah, Greece is right to block the ships to Gaza, even though it's a violation of international laws. Because they're going to come back and say, well, you know, international law, it's a flexible thing, and it should adapt to the needs of the government. By the way, have you seen that obscene cover on Time magazine with the Constitution going into the shredder? That's what they're trying to sell you right now. Oh, the Constitution, you know, it was nice, and it's an antique, and it's really outdated, and we really ought to let the government just get rid of it completely because we've got new problems to deal with, and this whole thing about freedom of speech and all the rest of that nonsense, really, we have to put limits on all of that. I don't think I've ever seen anything that disgusted me as much as that Time magazine cover. And the message in there is, yeah, you really don't want a Bill of Rights anymore. Trust us. Would we lie to you? And of course, yes, they do. So that's the push. They're going to be selling all this stuff. And when they come out and say, you've got to give up the Bill of Rights, and you've got to send your kids off to die in these foreign wars, and all the reasons they're going to give you, remember who it was who was telling you the truth about global warming, which is the alternative media and the blogosphere, and who was lying to you about global warming, which is the government and the corporate media. And you need to keep that in your mind in determining who you're going to trust as we chart our course into the future, because we were right, they were wrong. We were telling you the truth, they were feeding you lies. They get paid to lie. Look at all the money they've got. People trying to tell you the truth have got nothing to work with whatsoever. Maybe that should be your ruler. Trust the people that don't have a lot of corporate money pouring in on them, and ignore anybody with huge production budgets. And that's the best guide to figure out what's going on. Because the truth can be had for free in the United States of America. But lying to the people, that's big business here in this country. That's what public relations is, lying to the people for money. Paid liars. They call it public relations because they don't want to admit to themselves that's what it is, but that's what it is. It's paid lying. Now, just to show you how pathetic the global warming cult can be, they've come up with an explanation for why all their forecasts about warming were wrong. It's all China's fault. Our models were correct. The science was sound. It's those gosh darn Chinese. Their pollution is cooling the earth. Well, I thought you said pollution from burning fossil fuels was going to warm the earth. Yeah, but those Chinese, their pollution from burning fossil fuels is cooling the earth. And it's all their fault, and as soon as they stop, the world will get really warm. They're trying to salvage the agenda. They're still going to push for carbon taxes and controls over your life based on protecting the environment. And they can't admit, they won't admit, their ego and their greed and vanity will not allow them to admit they were completely wrong about the earth getting warmer. So now they're going to find a villain. It's those gosh darn Chinese. They're doing it. Attack them. Make them warm up the world so we can get rich. And it's absurd, but that's what they're going to do. We're right. China just made us look bad. It's silly. We're going to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be back in about 8 minutes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. I want to respond to something we just heard in the news break here about the upcoming death sentence in Texas, and how President Obama, concerned for the implications under international agreements, has gone to the Supreme Court to ask that the execution be vacated. This is grandstanding. Obama knows that his support for Israel's blockade of Gaza and ordering Greece to block the aid ships was a violation of international laws. And so now Obama has to pretend and pose to all of you that, yes, he really wants to follow international law. I wish he knew American law, because the president has the authority to commute a death sentence. All Obama has to do is call up the warden and say, I'm issuing a presidential pardon, commute his death sentence to life in prison. Presidential pardons are allowed to do that. He doesn't need to make newscasts and press conferences, and he doesn't need to go to the Supreme Court. He's doing it only to send out the propaganda that he is trying to comply with international law after starting wars in 6 countries. It's a fake. It's a fraud. It's all for show. If he really cared about this guy in Texas, he just picks up the phone. It's a done deal. Doesn't even need to call a press conference for it. Just call up and say, I'm the president, don't kill him, and it's done. It's all for show. It's all there to convince you that he cares about international law. All righty. Now, interesting little story. Over on U.S. Airways, there was a woman, Sandy DeWitt, who is a photographer, by the way, who was apparently very upset at being treated very rudely in the boarding area by one of the U.S. Airways employees, who was being rude to all the passengers. Probably, I don't know, maybe she was ex-TSA or something. You know the attitude they display. You're cattle, you're scum, get on board the plane, here's your stale peanuts and shut the heck up. So this photographer, Sandy DeWitt, takes a photo of the situation featuring the name tag of the offending employee. And then, before the plane is about to leave, this employee comes into the plane's cabin and orders this woman to delete the photo. And so this photographer, Sandy DeWitt, says, okay, it wasn't that good of a photo anyway, and she deletes the photo. But that's not the end of it. This employee, who was upset that anybody would question her rude behavior, went to the cockpit and said that this photographer was a security risk and had her removed from the plane. That's how completely out of control and how arrogant all of the security nonsense has gotten. So, U.S. Airways, bunch of pricks, don't fly on them if you have any other way to get to your destination, okay? U.S. Airways, bunch of pricks, don't fly on them. Now, it's time for us to take a look at the United States of America. We all like to go around and say, we're number one, we're great, we're wonderful, the world loves us. Actually, they don't. Here are some interesting statistics or facts that maybe you need to be aware of. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world and the largest total prison population of the entire globe. Remember, we're always taught in school about, oh, gosh darn those Soviets, they had the gulags and they had all the prisons, blah, blah. Nothing compared to the United States of America. We have this huge prison population. We have this huge prison industries business going on. These prisoners are convicted of minor offenses. They're sent to these they're slave labor camps, just like the Nazis had at Auschwitz. They're big factories with high fences around them. You go in, you work, they give you, a few pennies for your trouble so you can go to the company store and get some cigarettes or something. And they're loading these factories up, and that's why we have the largest total prison population of any nation on planet Earth right now. The United States has the highest divorce rate on the globe, which is an indicator of how much social stress we're under right now. We have the highest rate of illegal drug use on the entire planet. Of course, when you've got the CIA flying it in and trucking it in from Asia and South America and now Afghanistan, and I would explain why that's going on. We have more car thefts in the United States each year than anywhere else in the world. That may be because we have more cars, but again, it says something very negative about our society. We have more reported rapes and more reported murders and more total crimes in the United States than anywhere else on planet Earth. We have more police officers than any other country on planet Earth. We have more people on pharmaceutical prescription drugs than any other country on the planet. The percentage of women taking antidepressants in America is higher than any other country in the world. We have more student loan debt than anywhere else in the world. Which reminds me, I'm sure you've seen all these commercials on TV about internet websites that'll hook you up with an online college and arrange funding and financing for your online degree program. They can't even find jobs for the guys who actually went to a college where they drove up, went to the classroom and went through, and they can't find jobs for them either. These online schools, I don't mean to diss them, But I'm not sure the degree from an online school is going to really help you in the current job climate, and, of course, you will be saddled with more college debt. College financing has become the new bubble, the new scam. And when it explodes, oh, yes, got to go to the taxpayers for another bailout here. The United States leads the world in the production of pornography. Dubious little figure there. We have the largest trade deficit in the world. We've been talking about that one for a long time. And the United States spends 7 times more on the machinery of war than any other nation on earth. The U.S. budget for things that kill our fellow human beings is greater than the military budgets of China, Russia, Japan, India, and the rest of NATO combined. We are the murderers of the planet. We are the only nation to actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country. Iran is not the problem. Washington, D.C. is the problem. We also have the most complicated tax system in the entire world, probably to obfuscate the fact that the amendment on which the income tax is based probably was never ratified. And nobody can actually find a law that says wages and salaries which are exchanged for your labor represent taxable income. We have the biggest national debt the world has ever seen, and it's growing at $40,000 per second. Are we in trouble? Heck yeah. I think so. All righty, let's see. Phone lines are open if you want to get in on some of the fun here. 877-342-6673. 877-342-6673. Now, Fukushima. Not a lot of news coming out of there. The government of Japan is trying to deal with it. They're trying to basically sell to the Japanese people who have already suffered enough. You're going to have to pick up the cost for all the cleanup and everything. TEPCO doesn't have it. TEPCO can't build a barrier to the radiation because it'll affect their stock price, and we can't let that happen. Meanwhile, there's another problem there. Now, again, here in Hawaii, we're seeing the radiation trending up a little, bit by bit every day, but we're very lucky compared to the mainland. It's only been out of the safe zone, I think, maybe 4 times so far. But nobody really knows where the safe zone is. EPA keeps moving it around so that it's always above the actual level here. But the part nobody's talking about, we know about the radiation in the air, but the radiation in the water? Somebody in the chat room was going, Casey Anthony, Casey Anthony, Casey Anthony. No, the verdicts are in. You can't use Casey to hide things behind anymore. I'm sure tonight the corporate media will be, Casey Anthony, looking back, a retrospective, sun kicking. They'll milk that for the rest of the week, I'm sure. But anyway, getting back to Fukushima, the real problem is the debris in the water, because remember, that big honking tsunami went up onto Japan. And it sucked a lot of stuff back into the ocean. Well, it didn't just magically disappear. And they're basically tracking this 10-mile floating island of the debris from the tsunami, and much of it is radioactive. Some of it's highly toxic. And it's out there in the Pacific, and it's basically starting through that whole gyre current. It's going to be getting into the Alaskan fishing waters probably around September, October. It'll be getting into the Northwest Hawaiian Islands first part of the year, and eventually work its way down here to the occupied islands, and it's going to start washing up on the shores of the North American continent. And it's got as much, if not more, radioactivity than the stuff that was in the air, and nobody wants to talk about it. So it's a mess. It's really a mess. Now, over in Los Alamos, the good news is they've succeeded in controlling the fire that was getting near to those 20,000 50-gallon drums of radioactive waste stored under those tents. That's the good news. The bad news is the fire has basically destroyed all of the root systems, ground cover, and now they got to deal with the possibility of major flooding that could also hit the radioactive waste sites. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk a little bit about the economy. We're basically, everyone's talking about the Greek default, which appears to happen anyway. It doesn't matter how much more loans or bailouts, which are just another form of loan, are being thrown at the people of Greece. All a bailout is giving one people money that you've taken from another person. That's all it is. They're not really solving the debt problem. They're just moving the debt around for political reasons. Now, the new wrinkle in the system is Germany's top court, their equivalent of the United States Supreme Court, has accepted for consideration a lawsuit that says the Greek bailouts are a violation not only of Germany's constitution, but of the European Union's constitution as well. And if Germany's top court rules that it is in fact unconstitutional, then the bailouts are dead and gone. It's very obvious from the fact that this lawsuit is occurring that the Eurozone is on the verge of fracturing. And who did it? The money junkies at the IMF. They couldn't leave well enough alone. They wanted a global fascist dictatorship. They got the Eurozone, and they said, let's milk it for money. And because all private central banks issuing debt-based currencies are pyramid schemes and must eventually crash, we're starting to see it in the Eurozone. And they're trying to basically prop up this pyramid, this Ponzi scheme, by taking money from somebody. They're even talking about taking more money from the American people, because Goldman Sachs was selling all of these credit default swaps for Greece, which means when Greece goes down, they're going to turn and say, well, gosh darn you American people, you're going to have to cough up the cash for this. It's not a solution. They're simply pushing the debt around onto other people, like a game of hot potato or musical chairs. And that's all they're doing. Now, over in the United States Senate, they actually dropped even talking about this bill, which would have retroactively legalized the war in Libya, even though it's technically ex post facto and therefore unconstitutional. You know, but I guess the people in Congress, they saw that Time magazine cover with the Constitution going in the shredder and said, well, we're off the hook. Only as long as we let them, I might add. So they basically dropped that whole bill to attempt to retroactively legalize the Libya war because of the growing debate over the debt ceiling here in the United States of America. And you have basically the Republicans on one side saying you will solve the economy by lowering taxes on us and cutting spending. And on the other side you have the Democrats saying, no, 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 you've got to raise taxes on everybody and keep the spending. And behind it all, I mean, they're starting to use the A word around Washington, D.C., austerity. They don't want you to know it yet because they understand that everywhere the word austerity starts getting waved at the people, riots will follow. And they're afraid that what happened in Iceland will happen here, and they don't want that to happen because, after all, these are men and women of reputation and fame, and they are honor-bound to keep their commitments to the private central bank. The problem is they're buying their honor with our money. And I don't think they have a right to do that. They go out and they borrow all this money from the Federal Reserve and the IMF, and they spend all this money, and they say, our honor demands that we repay these loans. Okay? But why are we on the hook to save their honor? I don't think they're very honorable anyway. They're only honorable when they're giving away somebody else's money. The rest of the time, they're not nice people. There are very few members of Congress I would welcome into my home for a dinner. Ron Paul, given. Ron Paul's a given. But for the rest of them, I think they're very disreputable. They talk about honor only when it suits their purposes. And they talk about honor when they have no other reason to take money from you to give to their banking buddies. We say, why are you stealing from us? We're not stealing from you. Our honor demands repayment. Well, that's your honor and your debt obligation, and I didn't sign up to that. You show me where I signed a loan agreement saying that I will pledge my labor and the labor of my children and grandchildren to pay for your honor. And, of course, they can't come up with that. So they're trying to find the right snake oil, the right con game to trick you into saying, all right, we'll pay this stuff off. But it won't help. It can't. Because under the financial experiment of private central banks and debt-based currencies, there is no solution. There's no way to make it work over the long term. It must collapse or it must be taken down. Iceland found the correct way to deal with the crisis. Jail the bankers, fire the government that helped them do it, and refuse any more debt-based currency lending systems. They've told the IMF, get out, we don't want your money. Egypt's doing the same thing. No loans from the IMF. We recognize that as a tool of enslavement. And we will not do it any longer. And we need to do that here in the United States of America. Going to go to the phones. Patrick in Florida. Aloha, Patrick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Aloha.
Aloha, nui, nui, nui.
I was just wondering, how does Israel get all this power that they have? Where does their
bribery,
power come
threats,
from?
corruption. You know, it's a lot of different overlapping ways. Israel, the Mossad are masters of blackmailing, of setting honey traps. Remember that situation where I think it was the governor of New Jersey, and it turned out his gay lover was a Mossad agent, and he'd like put him in as head of security for New Jersey, and just all this other kind of stuff. I mean, Washington D.C. You've got to assume that anybody who's really cute and attractive, who's showing an interest in you, is probably working for some foreign government. And Israel plays this game very well. And they have a Congress which votes billions of dollars of your tax dollars to Israel every year. Israel funnels it back through front groups back to the United States of America, and a percentage is fed back to Congress for their campaign funds. It's a kickback scheme across international borders, and we all recognize it as a kickback scheme. And that's why our government...
Don't some other governments say, hey, we got to put a stop to this? So, I mean, is every government... Yeah, and
every time they do, the U.S. attacks them. I mean, look what's happening in Canada right now. Canada is going through what the U.S. went through about 50 years ago. And they're coming under the control of Israel right now. And if the Canadians don't stop it, they're in as much trouble as we are. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Patrick, are you still out there on the line? Okay, I guess we lost him. All righty. Well, let's see. Let's getting back to the situation here. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, there's this Time magazine cover out there showing the Constitution being shoved into a shredder. And the take of the article, is it really necessary? It's not up to you to say whether it's necessary or not. The Constitution of the United States of America is the original contract with America. It is the contract between we, the people, and those that we allow to serve as custodians for our national sovereignty. And the government does not have a legal right to simply ignore or bypass or spin the Constitution and its amendments. There is a process in the Constitution. If the Constitution needs to be changed and updated, there is a process built into it called amendment and ratification. And it may not just be set aside. It is not just a blankety-blank piece of paper, as George W. Bush stated when somebody said what you're doing is illegal. And now they're trying to sell this idea that maybe the Constitution isn't such a really good thing. It's not up to them to say. It's up to you to decide. And before you decide, please make a point of reading that Constitution and read the amendments. And maybe you don't agree with all of them. I certainly don't agree with the 16th myself. And nobody seems able to prove it was actually ratified anyway. We even have a federal court judge who admitted in a court proceeding the 16th Amendment actually failed ratification. Oh, my stars and heavens, the government lied to us to get our money from us. We understand looking back from our new wisdom that, yeah, that's what they do. But the point of this is, it seems to be fashionable among the corporate media to openly trash and dismiss the U.S. Constitution. Now, I don't think this is coming about just by accident. This is the beginning of a campaign to sell you on the idea that we need to transform the government into something that can deal with the war on terror, which means TSA becomes permanent. And by the way, some airlines apparently are now running you through security when you get off the airplane as well as when you get on. Can you think of anything more absurd? You've already gotten your crotch groped and your dose of cancer radiation getting on the plane. You arrive at your destination, and before they let you go to baggage claim, you got to go through another scanner and another groping. What do they think you did up there on the airplane at 30,000 feet? Do they think a little gremlin was out on the engine, ripping the engine open and handing you pieces to make a bomb with? It's a jobs program. They're trying to keep the unemployment numbers down, so they're handing out minimum wage and purple rubber gloves and say, here, go fondle people. That's your job now. And, of course, it is an attempt to simply condition you to simply doing what you're told, including taking off your clothes and getting naked for the government when you have to. Like they did to that poor 95-year-old woman in the wheelchair. They made her take off her diaper. Is that the United States of America? I mean, Independence Day was yesterday, where we threw out the last government over a 2% tax increase. And now we have to get naked before the government to travel, get a dose of cancer thrown in at no additional cost. And now they're going to bring it into the shopping malls and the bus stations and the train stations. Does it sound like an independent nation to you? Or does it sound like a fascist dictatorship and a new Gestapo? Brown shirt or blue shirt, doesn't really matter. It's the same mentality. This arrogant, I'm in charge, I have a badge, I have a glove and badges, I can push you around and you can do nothing about it. So we're starting to see this propaganda campaign coming up in the media as typified by this obscene Time magazine cover, where they're trying to say, you know, that Constitution, you really don't want that. Yeah, that's not important. We need to change the government to something that can deal with our crises, which is, in other words, change the government to something that is no longer going to be afraid of you. And, of course, you know that's impossible, because when you're dealing with an entire government that has gone paranoid, that is terrified of its own population, there is nothing they can do to the people that will ever be enough. They'll never, ever feel really safe and secure against an angry population until that population is literally living behind bars for their entire life. And even then, they'll be nervous about it. So, getting back to the economy here, I think I mentioned this last week. We're starting to see people who are being forced to work as interns in their mid-50s. Now, intern is, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, we're not talking about medical interns at the hospital. We're talking about interning is the new fashion in business, where somebody will come out of college and they'll go to work for a company for free for several months to prove their worthiness. And after they prove their worthiness, then they're given, you know, a very low paycheck and said, congratulations, you're now a real employee. But it's just a way to get free labor from the populace by the corporate CEOs so that they can buy more $200 hamburgers and $800,000 Bugattis and $120,000 wristwatches. It's just another way of impoverishing the people and getting the wealth up to the top of the system. And so there are people who are trying to find a job. They can't find a job. They've got experience. They're being offered internships. People in their 50s, they're being treated like 17-year-olds. Because that is the only way many corporations in this country can maintain their profitability. They actually cannot compete with other countries economically right now because of the severe tax burden and regulatory burden imposed by a government that doesn't know how to do anything except take money and write laws. I mean, look at the makeup of Congress, with very few exceptions like Ron Paul, who's a doctor. These are all lawyers. They're accountants. They don't actually know how to make anything or make anything work. All they know how to do is write more bills and take more money. And I don't think it's just a coincidence that those few politicians we have in Congress who actually do know how to do something, like Dr. Ron Paul, are the very best politicians we seem to see in our political landscape. And, of course, the rest of the clique, the lawyer clique, the money junkie clique, you know, work hard to keep them out. That's one of the reasons why when this country was started, there was no permanent ruling class of congresspeople. Everybody in government was expected to have their own livelihood. The job was not well paid. In fact, my ancestor who signed the Declaration of Independence, Josiah Bartlett, quit Congress because he was losing money. He wanted to go back to New Hampshire, take care of his medical practice, and take care of his other businesses. And eventually he was elected governor of New Hampshire. But being a member of the Congress was not a position of exalted wealth and privilege. It was a duty and it was an honor, but it was understood that you had your own way of paying your own bills. You weren't there to make a permanent livelihood out of being a member of Congress. Quite a bit different here today. Los Angeles is now the homeless veteran capital of the United States. I don't think that's something that they should be too proud about, but it happens to be true. Can you imagine all these people that volunteer to protect this nation from a foreign enemy, and they get sent out to loot oil and water and make the world safe for compound interest and private central banking? And after they do all of that, they come back to the United States, their jobs are gone, there's no help for them. I don't know if you saw this video that we ran the other day about how wounded U.S. veterans are literally being tortured and abused to sign waivers saying their injuries were pre-existing, so the Pentagon doesn't have to pay their medical bills. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. My goodness, the time has just flown today, and I got so much other stuff I want to get to just real quick. 44.7 million Americans are now on food stamps. 44.7 million Americans, and that includes a lot of our military people as well. They're being shortchanged all across the board. I'm going to make a point of finding that video about wounded American veterans being tortured by the American military to force them to sign waivers saying that their medical conditions were pre-existing and that therefore the government doesn't have to provide medical care for them after they leave the military. Shameful, shameful, shameful. Whether you agree with the wars or not, and I don't, we do have an obligation as a nation to care for those people who put that uniform on and went out to do whatever it was the money junkies in Washington, D.C. told them to do. We owe them that. The government actually owes them that. They're coming up short on that. If the economy and the government collapses, we are going to have to address that issue. We can't just abandon these people. Now, speaking of abandoning the people, as of last week, workers who are laid off through no fault of their own, I mean, just being let go for the reasons of the economy, not fired, let go. You will not be eligible for any of the extended unemployment benefits the layoff victims have been receiving since 2008. They've just cut it off. Okay? They know there's going to be another massive round of layoffs going off. We're already seeing the indications of a second dip in this depression. If they launch QE3, when they launch QE3, they're going to have to. There's no way to avoid it. The dollar is going to collapse. And now the government's saying, it's not our problem anymore. You're just going to have to shift for your own. Well, if the government's not going to take care of the people, they're not going to take care of the military, why do we even need them at all? I mean, think about it. The government isn't fixing the roads anymore. They're not keeping the bridges from collapsing. They're too busy over there in Israel and Greece making sure that the cookies don't get to the Gazans. They're absolutely useless to you and I. And they've created a situation where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for most Americans, our lives would be much better off without this current government than continuing to work ourselves and our children to death to try and perpetuate it along a little bit further. I think we're in that situation where if you have to honestly and objectively look at your life situation, you have to see the federal government as probably the biggest single liability in your entire existence right now. The federal government is not a blessing unless you work for the federal government or you're one of the federal government contractors. They're making out like bandits right now. They really, really are. Over on the foreclosure front, in just one Massachusetts county, 75% of the mortgage assignments are invalid. They can't foreclose. They don't have standing. The courts are continuing to rule that this is fraud. Massachusetts is pressing the state attorney general to basically stop all of this foreclosure settlement talk. This foreclosure settlement is just a way to simply wrist slap the bankers, take a little bit of money from them, a little piece of the action, and say, yeah, what they did is okay, go ahead and take the homes. And Massachusetts is standing up and saying, no, you can't do that. When the mortgage-backed security fraudsters were so desperate for mortgages, they created this machine called MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, so they could run the mortgages around and put them in and out of these investment bundles. And they didn't assign the notes to track with them because it was all being done electronically. And now they have all of these mortgages and notes that are separated. They can't even find where the paperwork has gone. And it is not legal to foreclose a home unless you have both documents, and MERS was not allowed to, they don't have that power. They don't have a standing to foreclose, and they cannot assign the authority to foreclose because MERS itself is illegal. They did not apply for the correct government permissions to run this system. It is seen by most state governments as tax evasion because it allowed MERS to basically pass mortgages back and forth and titles back and forth without paying the requisite title transfer fees, which is a major source of revenue for state governments. Because those fees are not light, and that's another reason why the state budgets are all in a huge mess. So the states, out of their own necessity of survival, are having to say MERS is not valid, and they can't do it. All right, real quick, Rick Perry, fresh from his pussyfooting around the TSA bill, is now out there saying we got to pray to Jesus. This is the guy who's getting ready to run for president, and he's saying America can only solve its problem through Jesus. Hallelujah! Jesus will save us. Now, setting aside the constitutional ban on favoring any one religion over any other in this country by any representative of the government, I would like to remind Governor Perry of the record flooding, the record tornadoes, the record hurricanes, the record wildfires, the crashed economy, the Gulf oil disaster, radiation flowing from Japan washing up on our west coast, and 2 more potential releases of radiation in Nebraska and New Mexico. And note that whatever deity he is praying to in the faith that said deity is causing all that happens, his deity obviously does not approve of the course America is presently on. Why are you going to go on praying for the guy that's bashing the country? Let's stop praying to Jesus and pray to Joe Pesci, as Carlin would say. And it's getting very alarming. The politicians can't run on their job performance. Now they're going to do the religion card. Michelle Bachmann is out there. God will bring a new day. God will curse us if we don't support Israel. That's all they got to run on this next election. They're going, God favors me. You know, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, then baffle them with manure. Seems to be the campaign strategy going into 2012. They're all going to fall back on God. I'm more godly than you are. I'm a bigger friend of Israel than you are. They don't have anything else to run on. Just absolutely amazing. By the way, speaking of torture, actually, no, we're going to go to the phones here. Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Boy, you're on a roll today, Mike.
Yeah, well, I had a nice vacation.
I wanted to speak one thing, but what the former caller talked about Israel, and Mike, I just can't help but think that Israel has the support of these central bankers, be it the Rothschilds or whoever. A lot of them are Jewish. I'm not bashing the Jewish people. I'm talking about the Zionist mentality or whatever, but right or wrong, but that's the way I think. They have an umbrella. They're working under an umbrella, or they wouldn't be able to do all these things. They wanted to create problems in the Middle East, and but I wanted to bring to light an incident that happened to me a couple weeks ago. And I was in a supermarket that I won't name, Albertsons, and this lady, okay, you know, they have the computer checkout deal, and they have the regular checkers, and more they're laying off the regular checkers, and more of us, you know, to go, and they're getting a lot of resistance to this. People just don't want to go to the computer deal, right? And all of a sudden they got this lady, and she's telling everybody for us to go which line to go into, you know, and and so when she told me, I just brought my groceries, I walked out, I called a few of my friends and had them walk out, and this thing fell flat on its face. Obviously it was a beta test to see if they can do this. And
well, they've got a couple of those things. They've got a couple of those things around here as well. And if you've got plastic that's intact, you know, sometimes you can actually get through these things a lot faster. They're obviously, relying on the honesty of the shoppers, or maybe it's just they're saving so much on having a human checkout person that a little bit of shoplifting, is still more profitable for them. But what's really very angering and annoying is we're seeing the same mentality going on where the corporations don't seem to understand your employees are your customers. And if all the corporations continue on this path of we're going to send our jobs overseas and we're going to have robots doing everything, then they stand around and wonder why Americans don't have enough money to buy their products or even pay their bills anymore. And it's an extremely stupid way of thinking. It goes right back to that whole Adam Smith mentality that if you're greedy for yourself, that you're somehow going to move society as a whole forward. And John Nash proved that was wrong. That was his doctoral thesis that he got his advanced degree for, was proving Adam Smith was absolutely wrong. But the money junkies don't want to hear about John Nash. They want to go back and worship on the altar of Adam Smith because it justifies very greedy personal behavior. Oh, yes, it's okay for me to be a greedy money junkie bastard because I'm helping all of humanity. And obviously they're not.
Hey,
and
Mike?
What Nash, yeah.
Didn't Adam Smith actually work for the West Indies Company when they came out with this philosophy? I believe they did. I believe he did.
I believe entirely so, but it was a philosophy that basically justified economic predatory behavior, and so obviously the bankers and investment houses, liked it because then they could duck the responsibility for what they're doing. People would come in and say, "But you're being a greedy bastard." No. This is modern economic theory that by doing this, we're going to make the whole world better around us, and it's not science. It's not even good economics. It's just another religion. It's another way of avoiding responsibility. To go on, people go on out, they've got the money and the power to basically yield to their basest desires and then say, look, this is actually helping the system in some arcane way. But it isn't. We can see that now.
And this actual thing of conditioning us to tell us what to do. TSA, this lady at Albertsons, I'm seeing this overall thing of, bring on down the police state. Like you said, we have more police officers, and I really like that deal you read off earlier, and it just really demonstrates that a police state is being formed right here, more so than China or any other country in the world.
And yeah, absolutely. And what we can do, though, and this gets back to that thing, if we boycott Greece and we push it over the edge into financial collapse, that'll bring down the Eurozone. And then the entire foundation for this global fascist dictatorship will be in a shambles. And we can pick up and say, okay, now we got to go back and we've got to do what Iceland did. Iceland has the only workable solution to the financial crisis. Throw the crooked bankers who created this mess into jail, fire the government that helped them do it. There is no other solution that works for the people. Period. End of discussion. That's it for our show. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Rense Radio Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, and aloha, America.